Analysing Tacitus. Tacitus is one of the greatest writers of the Roman period, and we're going to have a look at some of his best writing from Annals 1538. In my previous video, I talked about Tacitus's life and why he's so important. He was an orator, which means a public speaker, which is hilarious because his name Tacitus kind of means the quiet one. He was a fantastic politician, and he was a historian, and that is why we know about him today, because of his writings. We have 5 of his main works left. We have 3 monographs, we have the histories, and we have the annals. If you want to know a bit about each of these, you can go and look at my previous video. There's a link in the description below. The annals is what we're going to look at today. It was published around 117 AD, and it was originally called Ab Excessu Divi Augusti, which means from the death, the departure, of divine Augustus. So this is from the death of Augustus in 14 AD, and it goes all the way up to 68 AD, and it's sort of a prequel to his work that he had earlier published called the Histories, which goes from 69 AD onwards. It covers Tiberius to Nero, so the Emperor Tiberius, who was the second emperor who took over after Augustus's death, all the way to Nero's death. And we're going to have a little bit of a look at Nero's reign in the bit we're going to look at today. It was 16 books long, we think. We're not entirely sure. There are bits of various books missing, and we're not entirely certain that the 16th book is the last one because the last half of that is missing, but it doesn't really matter. The important thing is that some of it survived. In fact, quite a lot of it survived, and it gives us a really good look into different parts of Roman history. So we're going to look at Book 15, Chapter or Section 38. Just a quick note here, when we talk about books in ancient texts, we often mean something about the length of a long chapter in a modern text. So this is sort of chapter 15, section 38, but we call it book because it would have been written on a separate scroll. We're looking at the 19th of July, 64 AD, and the really important part on this date is the Great Fire of Rome. This is during Nero's reign, and it was a complete disaster for parts of Rome. Much of Rome burned down. Now, Tacitus is very keen not to say anything about whose fault this is. He says who Nero blames, but Tacitus also relates an interesting rumour that while the Great Fire of Rome was raging on, Nero was in his country estate singing a song about Troy. Now, Troy was an ancient city that burned down. And, unfortunately, Nero then built a grand palace over much of the destroyed city. So the bits that had been people's houses and shops and things, Nero built his golden palace. So Tacitus doesn't say anything, but the sort of impression here is that maybe Nero wasn't quite as upset as he should have been, that his city, Rome, had burned, a part of it had burned down. But there is a hint of the idea that possibly Nero was slightly more involved in the Great Fire of Rome. This is where the slightly apocryphal idea that Nero fiddled while Rome burned or played a violin, that's where this comes from. He didn't, but he possibly was singing a recitation. He was giving a performance about the destruction of Troy while Rome was burning. So let's have a look at some Latin. I'm not going to read all of it because I have got quite a lot of Latin on this video. This little section means a disaster followed. Whether by chance or having been contrived by the emperor, it is uncertain. For authors have put forward both explanations. So can you see there how he's being very careful not to say, I think it was Nero, or I think it wasn't Nero. He's just giving a very impartial view. But of all the things that have happened to this city through the violence of fire, it was more serious and worse. In terms of analysis of Latin prose, it's a bit different to Latin verse. You can't talk about word order, you have to talk more about style and technique. So sequitur clades. This is how section 38 starts. A disaster followed. Clades is quite a vague statement. It doesn't say what kind of disaster it was. And in fact, we have to wait for quite a long time to find out that it is ignium, fire, that is causing the problem. So this is a bit of dramatic tension that we're heightening here. Tacitus is heightening our expectation of what's coming. So a disaster followed. This is quite an emotive start to this section. Whether by chance or having been contrived by the emperor. So he's putting forward both points of view. Again, this is to create a sense of anticipation and a bit of intrigue. It could be by chance, it could be an accident, or it could have been contrived by the emperor, by Nero. Then we get this bit in brackets. Nam utrumque auctores prodidere. other authors, other people, not me, Tacitus is saying. So he's almost distancing himself from the blame. He's not saying, I blame Nero, but he also doesn't give the names of which authors say which. So it's a very clever way of telling his readers that there are two different opinions, but he's not putting himself in the firing line for anyone who might be offended by this point of view. Omnibus quae, of all the things which have happened to the city. Omnibus quae, all those things which, again, we still don't know what the disaster is. So this is heightening the sense of tension again. All this section is all about raising the tension to make it more interesting for the reader. It's a history. You have to give the really exciting parts to keep your readers entertained. Quick note, quick urbi, that's Rome. We're talking about Rome itself. It's often just called the city in Roman texts. Through the violence of fire. So finally we understand what the disaster is. It's the Great Fire of Rome. Gravior atque atrocior. These are both comparatives, which means we're comparing this disaster with anything else that has happened by fire before, and this is more serious and worse. We don't necessarily need both of those words. One would have done, so we call this pleonasm or tautology. You don't need both of them, one would have done, but it's to give more of a sense of drama. Next section, initium in ea parte. So this is its beginning started in that part of the circus which joins the Palatine and Caelian hills, the Palatino Caelioque Montibus. Rome was built on 7 hills, this is 2 of them. So it's starting in that part of the circus where, amidst the shops in which there was merchandise which feeds flames, at the same time as the fire began, it was at once strong and fast because of the wind, and it seized the whole length of the circus. So we get a snapshot of how the fire started. Initium ortum. Its beginning began. We don't need both those words, it's tautology, but it's just to hone in right on that very beginning. It's almost like if a film director zoomed in on one very specific bit before a great disaster. It might be the spark that we're looking at. So its beginning began. It draws us in, makes it very clear where we are in the story. Amidst the shops, so all amongst the shops. Now this is quite a common thing in Rome. There were fires because things were very close together, especially shops that might have had wine or other merchandise which feeds the flames, which is what this little part means in green. This is why the fire has started here. We're getting an explanation from Tacitus. He doesn't just say, oh, in the shops it started. He says in the shops, and then in those shops there were things that made it worse. So there might have been clothing or fabric, there might have been wine, there might have been food stores, things that feed flames. So again, we're heightening this tension. We get more and more information about why the fire became so bad. Then we also get, at the same time, simul, as the fire began, at once, statim, it was strong and quick. So these are both temporal words, these are about timings, and both of them together heighten the sense of how quickly this happened, which adds to the drama. Validus aquento quitus, so it was strong and fast because of the wind. These are 2 other things that make the fire so devastating. So Tacitus is just giving us more and more information about why this fire was terrible. He's increasing the pathos, the sympathy that we have, the emotion we have about this event. And it seized corripuit, the whole length of the circus. Now the fire is almost being personified here, corripuit, the fire seized the circus. And this almost gives us an enemy to target in our minds. We don't want the fire to succeed. This is a really clever way for Tacitus to bind his readers into the same headspace. We want Rome to beat the fire, but unfortunately this almost makes it sound like an evil fire that is seizing the city. So it's a really interesting way for him to write about an inanimate thing, fire, which doesn't have a motive, but this verb is often used when talking about conquering armies, seizing property, or tyrannical leaders seizing slaves, things like that. So using this verb is really emotive. It's a very dramatic verb. And it's the whole length, the longitudinem. We're getting more descriptive information so we can try and picture the Circus Maximus, the big chariot racing arena in Rome. It's almost like those shops that were selling souvenirs, things like that, completely engulfed. And this was a really important shopping district in Rome. So the whole thing is up in flames, completely gone. Neque enim domus monumentus, etc. 4. So enim is always a really good word to talk about. It means for something's going to happen. So because. For here, no houses enclosed by stone, nor temples ringed with walls, nor any other delay was lying in the path of the fire. In fury, the blaze spread through the flat ground at first, then surging to the hills and again plundering the lower places. It surpassed any preventative measures. So quick was the mischief and so exposed was the city, with these narrow streets and those winding irregular paths, as was the sort of old Rome. So here I've got neque, well, out, which means no houses, nor temples, nor any other delay. So we've got this tricolon of 3 reasons the fire kept spreading. The point is, the fire wouldn't have got the houses if there were stone walls. Same with the temples. If they had stone walls, they wouldn't have been able to be overcome by the fire, and there were no other delays. So he's giving us a tricolon of reasons that the fire kept spreading as fast as it did. No other delays. That's quite vague, isn't it? But that's a very interesting way to help our imagination keep running with this idea that there was nothing in the way. Again, in fury, the blaze spread. This is again personifying the fire. Impetu gives it a sense of aggression. This fire's not going to stop. Plana primum, edita, and inferior. This is all about where the fire goes. So at first it's the flat ground, the plana primum, which is also alliterative. So you could talk about how that draws our attention directly to that bit. So we start in the low areas because the Circus Maximus was in a low valley. Then it surges ad surgens to the edita, to the high points, to the hills. So you can see the progression of the flames up the hill. And then again it plunders the lower places, the inferior. Now that does mean lower places, but I suppose it has the sense of the poorer districts. So you can track the path of the fire because of how Tacitus has described it rushing up and down the hills. We also have per vagatum ad surgens populando antiit. This sentence is very full, has lots of movement verbs in quick succession, so you get the sense of speed of the fire. It surpassed any preventative measures, so quick was the mischief, and so exposed was the city, with these narrow streets, artis itineribus huic, quae et, and illuc flexis atque enormibus vicis, those winding and irregular paths. This is the key. This is the sort of old Rome, vetus Roma. These types of streets, they're winding, they're narrow. It's really easy for fire to spread across the way. If it was very wide streets, the fire might get to one side of the street but wouldn't be able to cross the road effectively. But because they're so small and so narrow and winding and built up, it's very easy for the fire to spread. Interestingly, Tacitus says vetus Roma. This was the quality of old Rome. This was the sort of streets we found in old Rome. The implication is we don't find these anymore in New Rome. We have had to rebuild. It's a bit of a tantalizing sense of the end of the story. We're going to have to rebuild. Bit of dramatic irony. We know more than the people who are in this part of history. The bit in pink also has quite a lot of pleonasm, tautology. You don't need all those words. If you just said it was narrow streets, you'd get the impression. But he's giving more and more description so that we get a really good view of these flexible, these winding streets, these really narrow, irregular streets. Ad hoc lamenta paventium feminarum. This part is bringing in different senses for the audience. To this was added the wailing of terrified women, those worn out by age or inexperience due to the age of youth, those who were saving themselves and those saving others, while dragging the sick or waiting for them, partially by delay, partially by hurrying. Everything was entangled. So this is talking about the wailing of all these people. People are shouting and screaming. Tacitus is drawing in more senses, which is really good to heighten the sense of drama and to make you feel like you're really there, to make you feel very present in the situation. So this is to all the problems with the fire, you also have the wailing. This is the sounds that you can hear. First, we get a tricolon of more vulnerable people who are being affected by the fire. So the women, the terrified women, the old and the young, those who are inexperienced because of their young age. These are the 3 groups of people who are wailing: the old, the women, the young. This is to try and give a sense of the human cost of this fire. That's what Tacitus is trying to give us. He's trying to evoke our pity and our emotions for these people by telling us a bit more about them. Then we have those who are saving themselves, sibi, and those who are saving others. There's no judgment here about which one is which, but we have a really nice repeated pattern here. Quique sibi, quique aliis. Those themselves, those others were saving. Then we have 3 really interesting verbs. Consulebant, saving, trahunt, dragging, and operiuntur, waiting for. 3 different actions taking place in a really short space of time. So we get this sense of this crowd. Some people are actively saving others, some have already saved them and are dragging them along behind them, and some people are waiting, they've lost family or friends. And this all adds to the sense of pars mora, pars festinans, this repeated use of the word pars, partially by delay, partially by hurry. Cuncta impediebant, this is the most important part. Everything was entangled. Everyone was wrapped up in everyone else. Everyone was getting in each other's way in the panic that is being caused by the fire. So all this is adding to the dramatic motion and events of the fire, the human events of the fire. We've had the sort of impartial bit about how the fire raged up and down, and now we're looking at the people that this is affecting. Tacitus has really cleverly done this. He's given us an almost cinematic view of the fire, and now we've zoomed in onto one street, and we can see how this is affecting the real people. And often, while they were looking behind them, they were surrounded by the flames, is the implication, at the sides or in front. Or if they'd escaped to somewhere nearby, when these places were seized by the fire, even those places they had believed were far removed, they discovered in the same misfortune. So now we're talking about the people trying to escape and finding nowhere is safe from the flames. In tergum, so they were looking behind them, lateribus and fronte mean at the sides and in front. So while they're looking behind them, the fire has gone down different paths and has cut off their escape route. They see the flames ahead of them or to the side, and it's almost snuck up on them. This is again the idea of the personification of the flames. The flames are almost like an evil presence. Everserant is a pluperfect verb. Now you can talk about the tenses of verbs if they make a really interesting point. You can often talk about the present tense being used. I'm going to talk about the pluperfect now, because the pluperfect here, if they had escaped, they have a very slight brief moment of light, of hope. If they had escaped to somewhere nearby, proxima. However, the implication with the pluperfect, if they had escaped, they aren't going to have escaped for very long. And when we get illis and quae, when these places were seized by the fire, even those which they had believed were removed. So we have a little contrast here. They've escaped to a place, even the ones that they think are so far away, they're not going to be able to use as an escape route. Again, crediderant is pluperfect, even those which they had believed were far enough removed. And longinque gives us that sense of distance. Long, now we get the word long from it. Eodem casu, in the same misfortune. Tacitus doesn't need to say the word fire again. He's used it before. Igni correptis. We've got that correptis verb again. We had it before with corripuit. Now we have correptis. It has been seized by fire, and they find all the other parts in the same misfortune. And casu, he doesn't need to be specific. We've been reading about all the misfortunes. So it's a very emotive and a very dramatic reading of the fire of Rome. So, when you are analysing Latin prose, there are some really key things to think about. How much description is being used? How clearly can you visualise what is being said? If there's any repetition or alliteration, things that draw your attention to a specific point, talk about it. If there's any personification, often a lot of inanimate things, so in this case the fire has been personified. And if there's any senses being talked about, a really great one for this is direct speech. We didn't have any in this passage, but we talked about the wails. He could have talked about the burning smell. Things that bring your reader into the very moment that you're describing, make narrative history really interesting. So that's Analysing Tacitus. It's a great section of the Annals. I would recommend you especially read the Nero section of Tacitus Annals, maybe the Tiberius bit as well. Really, really interesting. If you would like to get to the point where you can read this in the original Latin on your own, then why not start with my free Latin workshop, where you can learn the basics in just 1 hour. You also get all my free guides, so it's a really great way to start your Latin journey and eventually read Tacitus on your own in Latin. I hope you've enjoyed this Analysing Tacitus video. If you want me to do any other authors, let me know. If you didn't see my Virgil one, you can find that on my channel. And I'll see you next time on Bambasbat.